Hey class, how you guys doing? Hopefully you guys had a good week last week. Last week was the exam, and hopefully you did well. Hopefully you paced yourself as you went through the exam, prepared yourself to do so. Some people have a hard time doing such on an online exam because they're used to taking more time or looking things up. They think they can look everything up when they can't. You need to treat it as a face-to-face lots of times, and some of you guys don't do that. Please make sure you prepare accordingly. Couple of things. Hopefully you did well, though. So we're moving on now. We're moving on, actually changing our focus a bit. Our first section was a lot about the different types of rocks that we had on the Earth and the processes that go along with those. The second half was really focused on plate tectonics and the processes with stress, strain, earthquakes, volcanoes, heat, things like that. So a lot of those physical traits there. And now we're moving on to a different focus. So we've been focusing mostly on what we call the internal workings of our Earth, or what we call the geosphere. But now we're going to be moving on and talking about external forces. So we'll be talking about starting off with the hydrosphere and talking about how the hydrosphere impacts with our geosphere. And so just so as we go through this, make sure that you understand that focus. Now, in the hydrosphere, I am a geologist, but I'm also a hydrologist by trade, and I do a lot of consulting through hydrology. And so I try to focus on a little bit more on how the hydrosphere actually interacts with us specifically, like our water use and how we use our water. So part of your discussions, this module will be about that, about how you use your water on a daily basis. But just wanting to make sure that you understand that we're changing that focus a little bit and looking at how the hydrosphere interacts. So just looking at the objectives, make sure that in chapter 12 objectives is really a very small portion of that. We're not going to be talking about mass wasting in the class. I don't have time to talk about everything, but there is a section there that starts talking about the hydrological cycles. That's the portion that we want to focus on in that chapter. Chapter 13 we're going to be talking about quite extensively, and this module will be over about a week and a half, 2 week period, if I remember right. And so, so we're going to be looking at how fresh water is used on our planet, but also how that fresh water interacts with surface waters and groundwater. And then also later on in our next modules, we'll be talking about how the oceans interact with our coasts. So for the objectives for chapter 13, these are the ones that I'm going to be focusing on. We're going to be talking about where our fresh water comes from, talking about topics like sustainability of where we and how we use our freshwater supplies. We'll be talking about drainage networks, river systems a little bit, and where we get our water from that way and how river systems work in relationship to the geosphere. We'll be talking about groundwater and explaining how groundwater flows to the subsurface and how we use that for drinking water purposes and some of the negative impacts of groundwater, pumping groundwater that we have. We actually have a big project here on campus and in this area where I'm the director of, where we actually are monitoring groundwater throughout the county. So it should be a fun thing to think about, and if you're interested, come talk to me. But we're also going to be talking about karst topography a little bit as well, which is interactions of groundwater with the rock beneath us. So within this module, as always, keep your reading material. It's going to be chapter 12 and 13 material. It is a lot bothersome. This is a longer section. It takes a lot. It goes a longer time to go through it. So there's a lot more. Some of this stuff is stuff you've already might have heard before, and just redoing it over time. Okay. So, of course, you do have a reading quiz in this module. You have multiple quizzes. First of all, a reading quiz for chapter 12, and then also one for chapter 13. So that's your first week of 2 materials there. And then you have your lecture material. Now, as you remember, the lecture material is a little bit longer because it's for a longer period. This lecture material is over a 2-week period, so make sure you realize that. That's part of the reason why it's longer. Okay? And so then you have your discussion, and this discussion is going to be talking about how much water you use. You're going to actually assess that. You're going to assess your water use basically doing what we call a water footprint analysis and looking at it. Now, when you do this, make sure you understand that water, you have what we call direct water use and indirect water use. Direct water use is the water that you drink, you use on your shower and stuff like that, but you guys use water indirectly quite a bit. If you turn on the power, for example, you're using water because water is being used to cool the electricity on the power plant, and so therefore by using the power, you're actually using water indirectly. Or if you go to, for example, a lot of people don't think about this, but when you go to a restaurant, they're using water to wash their dishes, to actually to mop the floors and all that. Part of that water impact is for you, and so that's an indirect water use. To actually make these clothes, there's actually an indirect water use. To make almost anything, we have an indirect water use to it. So, and some things have more water use than others. For example, beef, which I have to admit is I enjoy my beef, but I like a good steak or something. But the point comes is beef actually uses much more water and also has more potential for contamination of that water than chicken does. And so some people actually have gone away from using beef because they're very conscious about how much water is being used and how much water is being contaminated because of that. So think about that. So this assignment is to help you think about that a little bit and to get that there. A lot of people forget about that when they do these calculations. They throw out all the indirect use. They don't understand how to do it. If you're not understanding how to do this, please let me know. Some people have complications with, especially the electricity portion and things like that. Talk to me about it. Okay. So so you're going to be first posting your weekly water use, water in gallons. Then you're going to answer the following questions in your discussion post. Okay, so you're going to first do the assessment, and then you're going to actually discuss these questions about that. Okay, and then in your comments to your peers, and some of you guys are having problems not following instructions in your comments. I usually give you a direct thing to talk about in your comments. So in this one is make sure you respond in ways that they can minimize their water usage even more. Okay, so and I do have an explanation there for you. I need to make it so it's closed captioned, but we'll deal with it. I had some issues with it earlier. So okay, then of course you have the chapter 13 online activity, which is going to be focusing on surface water, and then you have the chapter 13 online activity that focuses on groundwater. Okay, now remember this two-week module, so it's going to take a little bit longer. Also in this module we have because we have doing over 2 weeks, we do have 2 discussions. And this one here is one where you get to choose on what you get to do. There's 2 topics multiple topics I actually ask you to discuss. One is the idea about using bottled water. It's actually a pretty big problem in the United States and around the world, and so it's something that we talk about a little bit about what's the point of that, of using public water supplies or bottled water. Public water supplies actually are usually cleaner or as clean as bottled water, but they tend to have a negative connotation to it because of problems such as like Flint, Michigan that they had there, or other things like that. It has some people have given it a bad rap. But however, the standards that they follow actually for public water supplies are usually more extensive than the bottled water industry. And so I wanted you to look at that and to research that. So there's you can discuss that if you want. Some people like to. I give you basically up to three topics to explore on this, and you only have to do one of those 3. The first one is to read a chapter of a book called Message in a Bottle. It talks about the pros and cons of bottled water versus tap water. Topic 2 is watching a video. A lot of you guys do this one first. It is propaganda in a way, but have you watch it and then do the same thing. Actually discuss it. It's a little bit faster, so most of you guys actually take that option. But either way, it doesn't matter to me. The chapter to me is more informative and more non-biased than the video, but that's okay. And then the last one here is if you're not very interested in that, there is a local topic that I wanted to talk about And then there was a Gen X spill near Hope Mills, North Carolina, so it's not far from us, and had some contamination that actually impacted the Cape Fear River, but also our groundwater supply. And you can actually look at that topic and talk about that if you want. The last topic that we have is also a water contamination issue that we have here in North Carolina, and this is the issue of coal ash. So when we have coal burning power plants, they actually have waste that is left behind. That waste, most of the time, coal power plants are next to water supplies because they need water for cooling, and so that waste sometimes gets back into the water supply. And if it does, it can cause a lot of contamination. And so we've had issues with that just recently, actually, and during Hurricane Florence. There was the one near the Cape Fear River in Wilmington actually failed, and there was a lot of contamination going into the Cape Fear River. Now, fortunately for the humans, not for the animals, it's near the ocean, and we don't get our public drinking water supply downstream of that site. However, it could cause a lot of contamination and death of other organisms in the estuaries down there and in some of the coastal regions. So that's something that we have to worry about. A bigger problem is that we had back in 2014, we had the same problem up in the Dan River, North Carolina, and that was directly upstream from drinking water sites, and so that's something that they have to worry about. But anyways, the point comes is you get to pick between one of these 4 topics, research one of those 4 topics, and then discuss about them. Okay, so that's the next discussion. Now remember, this overview that I'm doing right now is for 2 weeks. It's a 2-week overview. I will help you along the way, but it is a longer section. Okay, so remember that. So remember the different sections there. So this is for 2 weeks. If you have questions, let me know. Okay, so the first part of our lecture is really talking about sustainability a little bit, how we use our water supply, our water resources. Then we go into surface water uses and the freshwater impacts of those surface water users. And then we go into groundwater uses and talk about that. Okay, so those are your options here for this time. You have 2 discussions for the 2 weeks, and then you have those 4 assignments, 2 for each week, and to get you through there. Make sure you do your lectures, material, and stuff like that, and you should be fine. Sorry, the overview is a little longer, but it's a 2-week overview, so I hope you guys do well. If you have any, like I said, any questions, let me know.